Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back with episode 22 of Journal of the Plague Year. Today we are joined by Matt Kettmann, senior editor of The Independent, who in normal times, whatever that is, covers the wine industry and food and spirits and outdoors and the good life, and has been expanding and adapting his beat since the shutdown and the crisis began. With stories about wine donations to medical workers and the community network of food giveaways, and of course the changing nature of food porn, which I suppose probably got more clicks than anything. Hey, let me start by asking you on the economic side in terms of restaurants. You wrote that restaurants are at the lockdown impact of ground zero for the shutdown. How important are restaurants to the economy in Santa Barbara, and what does it look like?
There's more than 400 restaurants in the city of Santa Barbara alone. According to Visit Santa Barbara, it's 71% of the reasons that tourists come here is for restaurants. They come to go to restaurants. It's the number one reason tourists come here, at least on a survey. I think you can make an argument that restaurants power the entire, particularly downtown economy. And people live here. I live here. One reason I live here is because we've always had interesting places to eat.
Right.
It's a scene. It's a vibrant community, and without them, Santa Barbara would be a completely different place.
What's the in terms of employment? How many jobs are involved in the restaurant industry, roughly? Do you know?
I remember when we first started reporting all this pandemic stuff. I covered a city hall meeting, and I can't remember exactly, but it was like, I want to say 4,000 people, something like that. And I don't know if that was a commingling of a couple different things, but my sense was that it was mostly restaurant workers they were talking about, and that makes sense. If there's more than 400, and some places have, mom and pops have a handful of employees, and some places have 20, 30, 40 employees, I think you're going to get to that 4,000 number pretty quickly, if not much more than that.
Right. So basically, everybody has been closed down. I know some people have adapted to takeout and pickup. But you've written, for example, about Chuck's on the waterfront, Endless Summer closing, although those appeared to be deals that were in the middle. Do you have any sense about, how many restaurants might be coming back?
I have a good sense that a lot of them are going to try to take a good old try at it. It's hard to say right now because a lot of places were motivated to stay open in some capacity in order to get that PPP loan.
The federal loan program.
And the problem with that for restaurants is that covers an 8-week period where they're not making a lot of money anyway. So some people are kind of forced to hire these people back and pay them, whereas actually a lot of these people make more money on unemployment than they do, especially in a no-tip environment in restaurants. So that's kind of an interesting situation. But then, it's gotten to the point where people are kind of, the biggest concern right now is that they're going to let them reopen in some capacity. There's going to be another little spike in coronavirus cases, and then they're all going to have to shut down again. And everyone believes that is going to be, if that happens, that's going to be the real death knell, is that you're going to put all this money into reopening, whether that means moving your now takeout operation into a dine-in capacity, or if you're going from, say, like Bouchon, which completely shut down just to save on costs, and then it's going to cost them $25,000 to open. It's almost like opening a new restaurant. Then you do spend that money, and then you've got to close again. That's that. You lost all your savings. So
yeah.
There's a lot of, the whole pandemic uncertainty is kind of the big word, that and pivot. And there's been a lot of both of those in the restaurant industry.
What are people pivoting to?
Takeout, delivery, that sort of thing. A lot of people have been able to keep their staffs employed by doing takeout, and no one's killing it. No one's making tons of money, but some people are doing okay. I've actually been surprised by visiting some restaurants to pick up some takeout, and they're like, yeah, things are okay. They're not horrible. Costs are lower, that sort of thing. Some landlords have been helpful and given some rent reductions. Not all of them. I don't even know if most of them. But so people are getting by. It's nothing like it was. So I'm hearing 70, even places that are still open, I'm hearing 78, 80% down business.
Wow.
And then the concern going back to opening is that with the social distancing rules in place, that's meaning a reduction in almost at least 50% of the seats, in some cases 75% of the seats. And restaurants are run on such a thin margin that that's not going to fly. If they have to go down 20% in seats, it's not going to work. So that's why you're starting to see the city really embrace some creative ideas like closing down State Street, opening sidewalks, opening parking spaces, parking lots to service, because that will allow restaurants to stay, maybe not 100% capacity, but within the realms of economic reason to survive.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that even in the best of times, most restaurants are, kind of operating on a very thin margin. Have you heard much from restaurant owners about their business interruption insurance and whether that's not being upheld by the insurance companies for them?
I've heard that in most cases, pandemics are written into the policy as a no coverage situation, because insurers are apparently quite smart and follow the news and realize this could happen. They've been waiting for it. I have heard from some people that they just haven't even gotten answers yet. Like they've submitted their claims and they haven't gotten a no, they haven't gotten a yes. So I think insurers are probably kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen too, because you can imagine the string of lawsuits that's going to come out, especially if the claims didn't particularly say no pandemic, but then the insurers are kind of in this boat of trying to defend not covering pandemics. So it's definitely in play, but no one's holding out hope that that's going to really help too much. So really, it's these loans that are helping for the people who are able to use them creatively, and then some of the small business grants. Some of them are coming through. Kind of depends on which bank you have and how helpful they've been too.
Yeah. So the governor had a press conference on, let's see, we're talking on Thursday, I guess on Tuesday, in which he laid out some specific guidelines for reopening restaurants. Is that solid enough? I know there's been so much uncertainty and shifting stories about what's possible or not. Do people feel comfortable now that they've gotten sort of at least a guidelines on a straight ahead pathway?
So it's a very long document. I've looked at it. There's like a kind of a column of shoulds and a column of musts, and what you should and must do. My understanding is that now each county develops their own plan and then somehow gets that approved by the state. So the state has been, I think, pretty smart about allowing the final decisions to kind of come down to the local jurisdictions. But those local jurisdictions have to get that, I guess, kind of given the thumbs up by the state in some capacity. And so those guidelines, which the county, I believe, is going to vote on next week, those guidelines have to obviously fall within the lines of these shoulds and musts. But from on the ground, I'm hearing kind of a variety of opinions. The public market, I know for one, Marge Caffarelli over there, I spoke with her today. She's playing a very hard line for public safety. So she's going to have people tested at the door when you come in. She's already putting up plexiglass. They're spreading out the seats. There's going to be hand sanitizer everywhere. She's implementing a bunch of policies for all of her tenants and her own businesses that are in there. So she's going to be kind of, I think, one kind of extreme is probably the wrong word, because it's probably a pretty cogent set of rules. But she's going to be one thing, and then you're going to have people on the other side that are going to do everything they can. I mean, every restaurant owner, I believe, honestly says, look, the health of our employees and the health of our staff, the health of our customer is priority number one. But we also need to be able to function in a way that makes sense. And if you're going to a fine dining experience, plexiglass everywhere might not be what you want, and so, there's talk of maybe, and this is kind of way down the road, but maybe on weekends, those who are okay with higher capacity restaurants should be able to have a higher capacity. And then on the weekdays, it's almost treated like the 65 and up at the grocery stores. On weekdays, that you do the full, social distancing all the way out. I mean, that's an idea that was floated to me today. And I'm not sure that that's going to fly, but that could be something of a reality if you look, 5-6 months from now, as we kind of ease into eating out again.
Yeah. I forget the woman's name, the Acme, the people that own the Lark. She's been very visible in all this too. What's going on with her restaurants?
Yeah, so Sherry Villanueva, I actually
Sure,
talked with her this morning or yesterday, and days are running together. She, she was at City Hall that one meeting. She was tearing up. She had to lay off 350 employees. I mean, I think that probably makes her the number one restaurant employer in town, other than maybe the John Scott group. But so she had to lay off all those people. She was able to hire some back. So then they did this kind of thing where they tried the takeout thing, and you do the math on that, and it just doesn't really pencil out. Even if you're doing well with it, it's not making you a lot of money. Then they shut down again. Then she did this, worked in a collaboration, which is now called the Community Food Collaboration, and also started working with the food bank and started basically getting grant money to buy their meals. And then so she was able to employ staff to make these meals. And that's a really successful program right now that shows a lot of potential for growth and for growth to other restaurants down the road if it persists. And then just this last week, she also reopened the takeout delivery thing too. So, I mean, she's as astute as a restaurateur as we've seen in this community. And you can see that she's kind of jumping around through solutions. So there's not, and obviously she owns a number of properties. So it's a little bit more complicated than owning just one restaurant. But it's, she's doing a bunch of different things. So there's no right way. I mean, I will say what she's doing with the community food collaborative is something that is being done across the country in other communities. You're starting to see a lot of chefs.
This was you had a cover piece, not in the current issue, but I think in the previous issue about that. Let me ask you one thing before we talk about that real quick, just as a personal thing. You had a piece fairly early on in which you got home delivery, and you kind of admitted you were a little bit ambivalent about it because you and your family had figured out their safety at home thing and bringing it in. What's your take on the sort of health safety side of takeout and pickup and delivery?
I mean, every single thing I've read, and I read a lot, especially before getting that, shows that there's basically no chance of getting it from the ingestion of food. So that's safe. The danger, and I think it's a very, very, very minor danger, is in the packaging that comes in and the transfer of, whatever you call that, contact to contact viral material. I think that's, personally, I'm not a scientist, but my sense is that is a very low risk. I don't think you're seeing a lot of that transmission across the world. I mean, studies on it are obviously not out or conclusive by any means, but it seems to me that most of these transmissions are indoor, fairly close contact. I mean, the outdoors seem fairly safe to me. This paper transmission seems unlikely. Anyway, when it did show up, my wife went through the entire Lysol wipe down of every container, and then we transferred every container into our, all the food into our containers. So there's definitely no, the food doesn't look pretty anymore when you get it. There's not a flour on it or anything. It's a kind of a mess, but it tastes good, and that's really all that matters. And so we haven't done a lot of it. We've done some of it. We've had coffee delivered a few times from Dune Coffee. We've done Convivo a couple of times. We did Bettina one time, and that's kind of a funny story. I got Bettina, and I was doing something like this, trying to, show off a restaurant and had a winery, and it was a complete technological failure. There's 1,000 people watching me flail on Facebook trying to get the thing set up. Meanwhile, when I got home to transfer the stuff, trying to follow my wife's thing, I dropped the meatballs on my garage floor, and I'm just like, oh God. And I scooped them up and said, screw it, I'm gonna eat them. I threw them on the plate, and I ate the meatballs on camera. I didn't tell anyone I had dropped them. So this is kind of like a breaking news piece. But anyway, so there are lots of, hurdles to jump over to enjoy takeout. But I do believe it's safe. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of people getting sick from takeout. And I know takeout is pretty happening right now. I mean, a lot of our readers are doing it. They're telling us. So
Matt Kettmann confesses to drop meatballs. I got the headline. That's good.
There you go.
All right. So this cover story on the food collaborative. Correct me on the name, but what was interesting, and you had it right up there. I mean, there's three things happening. That this collaborative is feeding people who need food. It's employing people who need work, and it's maintaining sort of the infrastructure of delivery chains and other things involved in keeping restaurants alive. Talk about who's behind that and what's going on a little bit.
Yeah, I forgot how I first heard about it, but I was like, oh, this will be a fun food story to do. And then I started to talk to people, and I was like, oh God, this is a way more complicated story than I was trying to bite off here. But that's fine. I can do this. I've done it a million times. So I started calling around, and so what I found out was really there's a couple different things going on. At least the stuff that I covered. There's even much more going on beyond that. But what I covered was this initiative called the Community Food Collaborative. It was started by a group called SB ACT, which is essentially a homeless outreach advocacy type group. They got some money from the Julia Child Foundation and some other donors. They got $40,000. They partnered with the Lark, and so basically, well, the Lark and Lokita, so Acme Hospitality's group essentially. They basically pay that money to the Lark. Lokita, they make bulk food. They make meals, and then those meals are given directly to homeless, both like street homeless, for lack of a better word, people that are living on State Street, that sort of thing, and then they're also given to the vehicular homeless. So from that, basically from the Lark, New Beginnings, which is a major organization in town that works with the homeless, among other things, and they work with the vehicular homeless. Their safe parking program is the one that's kind of emulated nationwide. So they're now feeding the vehicular homeless, something they've never done before. And then you have CityNet, which is much more of a kind of on the ground, face to face with the people that live on State Street and thereabouts. And they're actually contracted by the city specifically to handle I think the 400 to 800 blocks, and then like the, I don't know, 11 or 1200 block or something like that, 1000 block of State Street. And so they're actually actively out there giving these meals out too. So that's part of it. Both of those organizations, New Beginnings and CityNet, are also getting food dumped on them dumped in a good way from a bunch of other places too. Salvation Army is throwing stuff at them. New Beginnings is going out and buying $1,000 worth of stuff a week and giving that out. And so I started to talk to all these people and was like, wow, this is kind of a big effort. Then there's the food bank. So the reason I ended up on the story was because, Acme Hospitality kind of ties us together in a nice bow, but they're just kind of a component of each of these things. So Acme is also making meals for the food bank, as are a billion of other, entities trying to make meals for the food bank. And so the food bank is focusing now, they're used to delivering uncooked foods that you would get at home and then make, for dinner or lunch or whatever. But they're realizing there's this great need right now, especially among seniors and veterans, for prepared meals, and so the food bank is really focused on getting these prepared meals that really only need like, a microwave heat up, if that, maybe throw it in the oven. They're getting those to seniors all across the county. And so, so there's basically two things. The Community Food Collab is really like sandwiches, salads, stuff you can eat right away, no prep needed. You're living on the streets, you don't have it. You're living in your car, you can't plug it in anymore. You can eat this food. And then the food bank one is more like enchiladas. So you throw it in the oven, heat it up a little bit, and eat it.
Yeah, that was if you haven't read Matt's story, go back and find it. It was one of the few actually sort of positive stories that I've read. I mean, in a funny way, because in one sense it sort of called attention to the problem of hunger in the county, where we have all these great restaurants and hungry kids and stuff, but also the sort of entrepreneurial spirit of the restaurants and trying to keep themselves going and do good, the community resilience. So it was really good story that I recommend. You also did a piece about grocery workers who have suddenly found themselves as frontline essential workers. We haven't had a flyover for the grocery workers or the guys at Trader Joe's yet, but I'm sure it can't be far behind. They have, for the most part, remained employed, but I guess there's questions about their safety and the conditions under their working. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I was trying to get a little more into the concerns, but the reality is that you can't grocery stores like the bigger ones, the Ralphs, the Albertsons, the Vons, they're like their communication bubble is tight. Their marketing team does not allow them to speak to any media. And it's part of their contract basically. So it's hard to get in that bubble, especially when I can't actively go walk out and really kind
Right.
of just, hey man, tell me about this thing. So I was more limited to focusing on kind of the positive side of people at Trader Joe's and Gelston's, who I did have to go through. For Gelston's, did have to go through kind of the corporate media window, but they were totally open with it after that. And so yeah, they suddenly found themselves as this frontline working staff, and I think a lot of them, like myself, like a lot of people are just happy to be employed right now. But I do know that some of them, and this a manager told me, they were working, double shifts, round the clock, not getting a lot of breaks. And so it's obviously a hard time to be in that role. I mean, you have a job, that's great, but you have to be there. You have to be around sick people. And then one of the women I interviewed, a slightly younger woman at Trader Joe's, I mean, she was like taking on their anxiety the whole time, so you're trying to be nice and smile, and then you're dealing with these people, some of whom are just kind of cool, and others who are totally freaking out, and so there's obviously this kind of unknown or at least untallied mental health toll that's happening probably in many different industries, but certainly in this grocery store industry. And also, I mean, to me, it's funny, like what things went, toilet paper obviously went crazy. Then there was the meat thing and beans and all this stuff. And it's almost like, I almost want to, like, this would be a horrible move, but almost want to like write an article and be like, oh, canned tomatoes are running out, and just see if that can cause a run on, red clown noses or something stupid, to just like see if that would happen. Because a lot of it feels to me like there aren't actually shortages. It's just people are freaking out. And the grocery store workers had to just deal with that every day. I mean, I can't imagine. I actually barely even, my wife goes shopping. I don't even really go shopping. I'm home. I take bike rides, and it's about it. So
Yeah. What about the farmers market? They're still operating at not complete speed, I guess, but pretty robust.
yeah, I mean, they implemented some social distancing stuff early on. They were kind of getting flack in the beginning, but I think people, I mean, it's as essential as a grocery store. It's where a lot of people buy their vegetables. I think farmers markets, to some people, have this image of like hoity-toity, social scene thing. And sure enough, it can be a social scene, but it's also a legitimate place to be buying a lot of your food. I have some friends that run Local Harvest Delivery, which is one of these kind of multi-farm CSAs. I know their business has just blown up. Same with Farm Cart Organics. I know their business has blown up. So, people are wanting this fresh produce, but they're finding other ways to get it too, rather than going to the farmer's market. They're getting it, aggregated and delivered to their front door. So much so that I think both of those services are like, there's a waiting list now. So I think, farmers, the ones that, used to sell to restaurants a lot, are obviously kind of hurting. But I know a lot of that food is getting sucked up by the food bank too. There's a place called outfit called Veggie Rescue. They're taking a lot of the unsold produce. So farmers aren't necessarily getting paid for it, but that food is finding its way somewhere. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about wineries a little bit. We got dozens, I guess, of tasting rooms in Santa Barbara. How have they adapted? And what does their future look like?
They thought the world was ending when this all happened, and sure enough, it's not a great world for them. But a lot of them have been able to survive in kind of digital ways. Curbside pickup is still allowed. Their production, the actual winery production isn't affected. That's an essential service. So the farming's happening. The people are bottling. People are doing things that they need to do. I've been on like a dozen or so virtual tastings, which I actually have one right after we're recording this.
How do you do that? You just pretend to drink something, or I don't.
No, so they'll send me wine. So you sit there and drink wine. They're mostly like kind of like this, like back and forth conversations about, if I'm on there, sometimes it's about me. Usually I try to make it about the person that has invited me. So it's kind of a back and forth conversation.
But
Some
they
of them I've
send you the
seen.
wine, so they send you the wine up front. Is that how?
They send me the wine up front, and then for customers, you can actually buy the wine in advance too. So it becomes a sales push on their end. I mean, some I've seen where it's just like a person sitting there tasting wine. It's not that dynamic. I mean, those are not. I write for Wine Enthusiast magazine. I review like 200 to 300 wines a month. I do that all day long, and it's not exciting to watch. And it's just some guy's opinion, and you're not even like there. You're not even tasting the wine. So some of those are not successful, but the ones that are kind of a little more dynamic, and I've done ones that are like just like very simple, and I've done ones that have like multiple people talking and all that. So they're happening. They're very popular. And then a lot of people have done digital sales, flash sales they'll call them, where they drop prices for a certain period of time. A lot of them are doing free delivery, like right to your house. A lot of quick turnaround. The ABC, the state alcohol regulator, kind of dropped a lot of the rules that have been in place forever, just to enable both wineries and then restaurants with bars to kind of skirt a lot of the rules that are there. Delivered cocktails are a thing now. It'll be interesting to see how they put those genies back in the bottles if they do.
And then you had that piece about I think it was Cutter's Spirits that's now making hand sanitizer. That's a pretty.
Yeah, Ian Cutler's making hand. They're doing it all over the country, like all the booze makers, even some of the winemakers. I'm getting some shipments now that have some hand sanitizer in them in bottles, and I sent a text back to one of the guys that sent me, and I'm like, oh, you just put this with a lime and a little tonic water, right? It's a bad joke, but.
So what are you doing personally? Because so much of your, you have a sensory job. I mean, you're usually, you're out eating, you're tasting, you're doing all these things, interviewing people. I know you like to cook. Do you still like to cook after how many?
Yeah, I do.
So far.
I mean, I don't know about cooking dinner every night. That's getting a little old, but I love cooking. This has been, a challenge to come up with new stuff, and my work has not slowed really at all, which is good. I mean, the independent has shifted a little bit. I used to be, I'm in charge of the food and drink section, obviously, but I'm also in charge of, special sections and then some kind of general management stuff. And special sections, I mean, we had one this week, Home and Gardens, but that was kind of already in the works before this whole thing started. But a lot of those special sections are kind of on hold right now because they're related to things you can do, which you can't do right now. So those are kind of on hold. So, and then we furloughed, some of the staff. So there's more of a core group of us kind of doing a little bit of everything. I'm now on like a nightly editing rotation, depending on what day of the week it is. And then I've just been doing a lot of these kind of, COVID related stories in food and drink and other things. And also trying to make sure that we have some relevant, maybe slightly different cover stories from week to week. The first few weeks, it was just like coronavirus, which was appropriate, I think. But then we had to kind of make a shift to like, let's do something a little bit more thematic. And so we started doing that, a few weeks ago, and we've been able to hold that up. And we got the next, it's getting back into a little bit of normal groove. We have the next like 3 or 4 covers kind of figured out. So they all have COVID touches, but they're not, what's the latest, death toll or whatever,
Yeah.
A little bit more nuanced.
Well, that's a good point to end on, because you mentioned special sections, and anybody that knows anything about the newspaper business knows, those are revenue cash cows in normal times. You have content, you sell advertising around a special theme. And with those down, I know, restaurants themselves being down, all of these small businesses in trouble. I mean, it's a huge hit to the paper, because that's where your revenue is. And you guys have been talking about a new subscription thing and some other ways people can help. You want to just mention a little bit of that?
Yeah, I mean, we actually started we've talked about subscriptions or donations for like, I want to say a decade. And then finally, at the beginning of this year, we started a subscription model with kind of I'd call it like a light selective paywall on independent.com. And we were still kind of fumbling around trying to figure out how that was going to work. And then this pandemic hits, and like a lot of industries, it kind of forced us to really, ramp up that game, and not by putting up more paywalls, because most of our content at that point was breaking news, public health related. And we've always pledged not to put that behind any paywall, because that's, critical information for our readers. So instead, we just kind of ramped up the ask and said, hey, you like us, you've liked us for years. Here's your chance to support us. And, one of the reasons we did the subscription model wasn't so much to have a subscription to something. It was really just to kind of give a portal to people who, for many years, have said, oh, how can we support you? If you don't have a business to advertise, there isn't really an obvious way to help the paper. And so this kind of opened that window for that. And it's been, very, very successful. And it's been very encouraging and, if not humbling, to see the kind of levels of support that have come out of the woodwork just to support what we do. And then on top of that, we have a partnership with SB Can, the County Action Network, and you can do a donation that goes through them, which is a nonprofit, so you can get a tax write-off. And then we also have just straight up people writing checks to the paper. They don't want a subscription; they just want to show their support. And so all three of those avenues have been working, together to fill, essentially a gap in which, half of our advertisers couldn't support us overnight. You really, really quickly realize how both integral and reliant you are on your community when something like this happens, which thankfully hasn't happened before. So hopefully it's not a new thing. Hopefully we kind of emerge from this in the next few months or so, and vaccine comes along and we all get back to some semblance of normal. I don't think it's ever going to be, the same, but it'll be nice to be out and having a drink with your friends in a restaurant and sharing the same plate even. My God, being in the same space, it'll be a glorious day.
All right. So go to independent.com, and this is your periodic reminder to support local journalism. Matt Kettmann, thanks a lot for taking some time to spend with us and talking about the economic and jobs and cultural impact of this thing on the town. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. And a lot of this will be next week's cover story too. So you're getting kind of a preview.
Oh man, I'm always in front. All right, I'll talk to you.